Okay, today what I'd like to do is go over the time clock, and the example I'm going to give is a 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. shift. Now, if you recall, when we talk about the job order itself is going to have a described time frame that the contractor is going to accept a position. So in this example, and we've talked about this on numerous occasions, a nurse, and it doesn't matter if it's a nurse, it can be an accounting professional, it could be somebody working on any contract whatsoever. We're going to have time clock window management, and that's what this is kind of discussing. So from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., that's the shift that's been assigned in the contract that was agreed to by whomever the contractor is and whomever the staffing company is. So the system itself is going to recognize what's been put in the system from a job order perspective. So from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., the person works the shift, they come in, they clock in like normal, clock in at 7 a.m., clock in at 7 p.m. None of the rest of what I'm going to describe comes into play. But we have instances where someone works either a later shift or they forget to clock out. And that's what this auto clock out is designed to do. And it's essentially to help make sure that the hours that the contractor is supposed to be there are either met, and if they're exceeded, there's a note put in the system for them exceeding the hours. If the time is missed, the client's not going to get overbilled for time that the contractor did not account for. So there's going to be a 5-hour window for the auto clock out. What that means is contractor clocks in at the start time, 7 a.m. They work their entire shift and they forget to clock out at their 7 p.m. clock out time. The system will be watching for activity up until a 5-hour point. Very few people are going to work a 5-hour shift on top of a 12-hour shift. So if it does occur, the system is going to allow for corrections to be made to any time clock situation that's outside of the contracted purview, right? So 7 a.m., 7 p.m., contractor does not clock out. An auto clock out of their time will occur 5 hours from 7:01 essentially p.m. So when the auto clock out occurs, contractor notified, email, and the manager notified. Anytime the system is going to create a function here on behalf of the candidate as it relates to time, because time is relative to money, because every hour the contractor works, the system is calculating those hours in relative to the bill rate. So if there's an auto clock out that is created for this candidate, the purpose of this is to say, did you make a mistake? You didn't clock out at 7 p.m. Did you leave at 7? So the questions that the system will ask for accuracy So did you leave at the scheduled time? Did you actually leave at 7 p.m.? The other one is, did you work beyond 7 p or scheduled time? So did you leave when you were supposed to and you forgot to clock out? Did you work beyond 7 and you need to make an adjustment? So this would trigger an adjustment to the timesheet. So when an adjustment occurs, obviously it's gonna allow the contractor, in the event that they didn't clock out at 7 p.m. and forgot to clock out altogether, but they really stayed until 9 p.m. So they worked till 9 p.m. and they need to make an adjustment. This email, when it's sent, is going to have something very similar to what I'm illustrating here. Did you leave on time and forget to clock out? And it'll take them into the system, and it basically acknowledges their actual clock out time. Did you work over your scheduled time, therefore needing to make an adjustment? They'll be able to have that option. They can click on that and make the adjustment. So the scheduled time, instead of utilizing, the actual end time, did you work your scheduled time or beyond your scheduled time? They need to be able to put, maybe they left at 5 p.m. because they had some emergency crop up. They can adjust their time backwards, or they can adjust their time forward from the 7 p.m. time clock, or the 7 p.m. scheduled time in the system time clock manager. So once this has been corrected, or this has been corrected, emails then go back to the hiring manager, right? Letting them know which of these two occurred, and they either approve it or they decline it, okay? The whole purpose behind this, and if it's happened once, it's happened 10,000 times in my career, somebody just forgets to clock out. That's the majority of what happens. They just forgot. Yeah, I left, forgot to clock out, my bad. Back when you were doing paper timesheets, this isn't a big deal, and the other problem with paper timesheets is by the time that paper timesheet's turned in, a week has gone by, and an eternity's worth of work has been conducted or performed. And most people, because we're people, we miss those little mistakes, like, oh yeah, I forgot, yeah, Julie left at 5 p.m. So these clock out measures from the auto clock out perspective are going to create triggers that are going to help jog the memory of the candidate and the manager. And if the manager is not directly connected to the candidate, for instance, let's say there's a shift supervisor, but this is all going to be generated at the hiring manager level. If there's a shift supervisor, this manager can reach out to the shift supervisor and say, hey, did this contractor leave when they were supposed to? Did they stay late? What's the situation here? And perhaps when we get a little farther down the road, or we can even discuss this in the next call, an option to where the hiring manager, once they've hired the person that they want to bring on board, a candidate can be assigned to a manager. So let's think through that, if that's not going to create too much of an issue. If the hiring manager, so once the job order's been created, there's going to be a hiring manager attached to it. Then the hiring manager, once they've identified the candidate, can assign a manager over that particular candidate that's been attached to the job order. So let's examine that on a future call, so that we know if we can make assignments of candidates so that they can actually, it can be a little bit more granular when we're talking about who's getting notified of the auto clock out and any other time discrepancies that occur. So that way we can actually have the person that's working directly under the supervisor, and perhaps there's another measure that will allow for direct management, and then senior level management can get notified if the direct manager isn't responding or communicating. So the next thing I want to talk about, and this is important, so keep all of this in mind as we go into the next this next section. So we've talked about, and this is where Gagan and I spoke about invoicing. So understand with the master invoicing process to the client, and this may have to be cut up into a couple of different sections, but let's just talk about things as it relates to time tracking. So you've got an invoice that's going to have candidate name, hours worked, bill rate, and then a total over here. And this is all going to be relative to the master invoice, and anything subordinated from that, if we, let's say in each of these, this is in digital format, not in paper copy. As we're looking at this, if someone needed to see more detail, they could see who the staffing company was and any other pertinent information as it relates to this candidate on this project. But let me get back to the specifics as it relates to timesheet. So most organizations run a Sunday through Saturday work schedule, okay? So at 12 a.m. Sunday to 12 a.m. Saturday constitutes the work week. So anybody working shifts that are overnight, that go from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., there's going to be a portion of that, it's going to be fractions of a work schedule, okay? But we're going to have to close the week in this window. And if anybody has questions about that, we can examine it over the phone. But understand, at 12 a.m., if somebody started at 7 p. and they end at 7 a., hours from 12 a.m. to 7 a.m., those 5 hours are going to appear on their next check and won't be on, or on the next invoice and not on the current. But again, we can drill down into that. The specifics of what I want to review here is the timesheet approval process, okay? So as we discussed a few moments ago, or as I illustrated a few moments ago, you've got timesheet. So and this is generated from the clock in or clock out procedure of the contractor. And of course, we talked about the mechanism as it relates to the auto clock in, the auto clock out. So at the end of each week, so when Sunday rolls around, we're at the start of a week. Every Monday, there needs to be a reconciliation of any open, unapproved timesheets, all right? So the timesheet approval process is gonna go contractor, they're gonna approve their hours, right? They're gonna look at their hours and go, oh, I don't have to make any adjustments. All my hours are correct. I worked 7A, 7P, 3 days this week on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. So they're gonna be the first step of the process, okay? So this is number one. Number two is gonna be the local manager or their supervisor. That's number two, all right? The final person in the stage, and this person can be the same person, okay? In the event that there is no supervisor, it's the same hiring manager for the job order, okay? So in some size, shape, form, or fashion, these are gonna be the 3 or 2 areas that it goes to. Contractor approves their own time. They're like, yes, I acknowledge this is my time. Submit my timesheet for approval, okay? Now, this needs to be a system-generated email, all right? So at the close of the work week, at 12 a.m. Sunday, the system can generate the previous week's work from Sunday to Saturday. So this can go in the form of an email or a direct login to the system. All right, and this is on the individual contractor, okay? Then that individual contractor can approve their time, and once they approve their time, it gets noted inside of the system. Now, what I think is much more advantageous, instead of individual emails going to the hiring manager, let's say they have 15 contractors working on whatever project this is. If it's a nurse, they're working on the OBGYN floor or whatever the case may be. And they're working, they don't need to get 15 emails saying that they have 15 approvals from 15 different contractors on their hours. They need to be notified that their time, that contractor timesheets are prepared for review. So they'll get one email, and then they will have to log in. They'll log into the system for approval, okay? So it should look more like a grid, right? You know, just all the contractors in here that they report to, their hours, and then, you know, basically they can have a little checkbox right here that checks every single one of them. And then down here, we can have approve all. And if they look at it and go, yep, all these hours are right, I remember everybody's hours at work, blah, 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 whatever, approve hours. The only times, if time has not been approved by the contractor, if the time hasn't been approved by the contractor, their own time, if it hasn't been approved, then they can't approve all, first of all, and these guys are gonna be, there's gonna be some notification whether we make their, you know, a red box right here, some sort of warning, or maybe they're grayed out until the contractor has approved their own time. Now, and this is important, this next thing that I'm about to say, because if the contractor doesn't approve their time, that doesn't mean that it's going to go on for infinity. Because if they don't approve their time, they're not going to get put ultimately in the invoice. If they're not in the invoice, the staffing company doesn't get paid. If the staffing company doesn't get paid, they're not going to pay the contractor. So here is the auto approval . The auto approval of hours. Just like we had the auto clock out, if a contractor is, you know, essentially brought on for 7A to 7P, and they've approved and they've acknowledged their time, or there's been an auto clock out measure, or whatever the case may be, that's been solved and satisfied, the contractor is the first one to approve it. If they don't approve it, and they only have 8 hours, so after 8 hours, it gets auto approved by the contractor. So whatever happens, if they don't acknowledge in this 8 hours, the window of time that they've been given to review their timesheet, their clock in, clock out, if it was auto approved or auto corrected rather, if it was auto corrected back to 7 p.m. and the contractor never edits it because he actually worked until 5 p.m., the manager has to acknowledge their time. And as long as it was acknowledged and the manager was like, yeah, they worked till 7, the system gives the contractor an 8-hour window to sign off on this. So basically by close of business Monday, right over here, everything is going to be live in the system to be approved by the manager. So on Tuesday, manager can approve. All right. So there's going to be varying degrees of scenarios that we're going to end up talking through, but the bottom line is this is designed to get the invoice generated, okay? And it creates mechanisms for the contractor to be able to acknowledge their own hours, make corrections if there needs to be any corrections made during this window of this period of work, of this period of week where work was either done or left early or came in late. The manager has the ability to make the corrections in real time as errors have been made when the clock out measures created an auto clock out email. That we should have all of those steps should be completed by the time we get to Monday, where at Sunday night, when the new week starts, and this is generated on Monday by Monday morning. Actually, it can be generated midnight Sunday night. So Monday morning, when normal course of business, they come to the office, they've got essentially this is prepared, and the manager themselves can see who's grayed out. And if none of the contractors have approved their time, they could reach out and say, hey, just make sure you approve your timesheet. And the system is going to be sending this email out to every contractor that worked this past week's shift. They acknowledge that the time worked is correct. They approve it. It then goes to whichever portion in this hierarchy is in the next stage. Goes to the supervisor. Supervisor logs in and sees that everybody's clear. They hit the checkbox, click approve. Invoicing is now, our timesheet is now done and ready to be populated into the master invoice. In addition to what's happening in the master invoice, and we talked about this previously, the invoice is actually segmented with staffing company, where an individual staffing company can pull their individual invoice at any given time. They can look at what hours have been approved, and they can generate an invoice for purposes of banking. And if we need to go into that again, please let me know on a future call and we can discuss that. But if I'm the staffing company and I want to take a look at my accumulated hours that are billable for the previous week, there's going to be an option for me as the staffing company to take a look at all my contractors on billing and look at what my billing snapshot looks like for any given week. And the purpose of that is so that I can run a report, I can create a pre-master invoice, okay, that I can submit to my banking relationship so that I may be funded for payroll, okay? So I've got to pay my contractors every week, but the system is going to generate a master invoice once a month, and they're going to pay all of the invoices that are outstanding to all of the staffing companies in the first part of the following month, okay? And we can go into the mechanics of that as well if that needs, when that needs to be explained further. But the last day of the month, so the month is going to start on the 1st, and it's going to go all the way to the 30th or the 31st, okay? So the master invoice starts keeping track and record day 1, month 1. So if this is January 1, on the last day of January, that's the end of the month, and all the hours that have been calculated inside of the work weeks up to that point, and it's going to be broken in the middle of the week, because not all weeks are going to start on a Sunday and end on a Saturday, or all months rather are going to start on a Saturday and end on a Sunday. So we're going to end up with fractional payment records to the staffing company, but that's a whole nother discussion that needs to be had, as it relates to the staffing company relationship with staff elements. But the master invoice is the single invoice that the client gets for all of the contractors across all of the staffing companies. There's one invoice. Inside of this one invoice is the total of every single contractor, every single hours, every single bill rate, and a total at the end of that is what is paid by the client. Staff elements, and I know for sure this is going to be a secondary or tertiary discussion. Staff elements is going to have the reporting features that mirror the master invoice but then separate payment by staffing company. So we're going to have to have rather the ability to, we're just gonna call it run payment cycle, okay? Staff Elements as an organization serves as the clearinghouse, right? So all the payment from one client comes in to Staff Elements, and then we're the clearinghouse, and we send all the payments to the staffing company spread across however many staffing companies are associated with these contractors that are working. So all of this going back to, you know, the client, the job order, the staffing company that gets attached to it with the candidate that's accepted by the hiring manager, all of that gets embedded in and is ultimately in the master invoice. But beyond the master invoice, when payment needs to be rendered by Staff Elements to the staffing company for the work that was billed for in this invoice and subsequently paid by the client, if there's 10 companies, this needs to be fractionalized and divided into those 10 companies for 10 individual payments that will equal the total amount of that master invoice. So take a note here, and we will revisit this, and so Santosh or Gagan, let's bring this up at a later date on actually how the invoicing, you know, will work from the master invoice and then be broken down and fractionalized to make sure that every staffing company receives their payment. So for now, just to kind of reiterate what we went over in the beginning was the auto clock out measure. There's, you know, if someone's working from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., they forget to clock out, they will have a 5-hour auto clock out time. So if they work from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. at midnight, it's gonna automatically clock them out at the time that they were supposed to clock out based on the job order. And when that occurs, that triggers an email to the contractor that says, hey, you didn't clock out. Did you work your hours? If you didn't work your hours, you need to put a note in the system. If you left early, you need to put a note, you need to, you know, request approval for having left early, or you need to request approval for logging, you know, for not clocking out at 7 p.m. If you worked over your hours, you need to request approval for the times worked over your clock out period. So the contractor can then make the adjustment. It gets sent to the supervisor or hiring manager. They authenticate it in the system by approving it. Move on to the next day. If we get all the way through the week, contractor is going to continue to receive emails until they correct the problem or address the problem. And if they don't address it, let's say the contractor was terminated in that window, the supervisor is going to have to override the contractor approval of the hours. And they're going to have to acknowledge when the contractor actually left, if they left early or stayed late or whatever the case may be, or if they clocked out on time. Then when we get to Monday, when the report comes out, for every contractor is going to review their time, they're going to approve their time, and they get an 8-hour window in which to do that. So in this 8-hour window, if this contractor hasn't approved their time, that's already been corrected from any auto clock outs, all of those things being equal, and we've reached this stage of the week, they have 8 hours, and if not, whatever is in the system is going to automatically be approved. So there's going to be an auto approval here. So when this auto approval happens, the supervisor is made aware and the hiring manager is made aware that everything's been approved in the system. Only then, and it's going to have to be submitted to the Staff Elements team that's working with this client. If there's an error past this auto approval, once this auto approval takes place, this is locked in. No edits can be made at the client level. The client will then have to submit a request for an adjustment to the Staff Elements office to fix it. And we will have a very narrow window with which to approve it as we're getting close to the end of the month, okay? But we can override any time clock, any correction that needs to be made, all the way up to 12 a.m. or 11:59 rather, on the last day of the month. So we can get into some more mechanics as it presents later. We can talk about some of the other things that I mentioned throughout the course of this video as time permits on future calls, and as we need to get and drill down a little bit deeper as it relates to the time clock measures and as it relates to the invoicing. Understand there's a master invoice, and then there's a individual staffing company invoice. So the master invoice is generated and pieces of it are accessible by the staffing company that's got contractors that are controlled under this master invoice. So we'll revisit these questions on a future call. Thanks, guys.